Terry Tucker is a motivational speaker, author, and cancer warrior known for his resilience. From NCAA basketball to SWAT negotiations, Terry's journey is one of determination. His book, Sustainable Excellence, offers invaluable insights into living an extraordinary life, earning him features in top magazines. Terry's story inspires us to persevere boldly, no matter the challenges we face. Terry, welcome to the show. A real pleasure to have you here.
Well, Brad, thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today.
So we've got lots to talk about. And before we get into the details, I'd love you to share a little bit about who you are and what you do with our audience.
Sure. So I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I am the oldest of three boys. You can't tell this from my voice or from looking at me, but I'm 6'8" tall and actually went to college on a basketball scholarship. When I graduated from college, I moved home to find a job. I'm really dating myself now. This was long before the internet was available to help people find employment. Fortunately, I found that first job in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, which is a fast food chain that I know we have in the United States. I know they're around the world. I don't know if you have them in New Zealand or not, but it was, at the time, it was about a Fortune 50 company. That was the good news. The bad news was I ended up living with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mom care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. Professionally, as I said, started out at Wendy's, and then I went to work for the hospital that cared for my father and my grandmother. Then I made the major pivot in my life, became a police officer. Part of what I did during my law enforcement career was I was a SWAT hostage negotiator. After that, I started a school security consulting business. I coached girls' high school basketball for a while, but for the last 12 years now, I've been battling a rare form of cancer, a rare form of melanoma. And then I guess just finally, my wife and I have been married for 30 years. We have one child, a daughter, who's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and is an officer here in the military here in the U.S.
What a journey. And before we get into the rest of the questions, what is it like being 6'8" tall? And that comes from someone who's a lot less than that.
Well, it's funny because, I'm 6'8", I've got a brother 6'7", a brother 6'6", and then my dad was 6'5". So we used to joke that if you sat behind our family in church growing up, not a prayer's chance you were going to see anything that was going on, in the front of church. I've always loved being tall. It's you get to see over everything. You're never blocked by anything. So I've always loved being tall in my life. And I'll be honest with you, when I was 13 years old, I was 6'5".
No,
so it gives you an idea
incredible.
of, skinny, big ears, the whole. I got teased a lot, but eventually I grew into my body. So.
Yes. It's pretty handy for basketball, I imagine.
It is, very much so.
Mm-hmm. Great. So you've written a book called Sustainable Excellence, 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life. I'd love to know what inspired the writing of this book.
Yeah, the book was really born out of two conversations that I had. One was with a former player that I had coached in high school who had moved to the area in the United States where my wife and I live with her fiance. And the four of us had dinner one night. And I remember saying to her after dinner that I was excited that she was living close and I could watch her find and live her purpose. And Brad, she got real quiet for a while. And then she looked at me and she said, "Well, Coach, what do you think my purpose is?" I said, "I have absolutely no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about. Finding the reason you were put on the face of this earth, using your unique gifts and talents, and living that reason." So that was one conversation. And then I had a young man reach out to me on social media from college. And he said, "What do you think are the most important things that I should learn, not to just be successful in my job or in business, but to be successful in life?" And I didn't want to give him the, get up early, work hard, help. I didn't want to give him sort of the cliches that we all give. I wanted to see if I could go deeper with him. So I spent some time taking some notes and eventually kind of had these 10 thoughts, these 10 ideas these 10 principles. And so I sent them to him. And then I stepped back and I was like, well, I got a life story that fits underneath this particular principle, or I know somebody whose life emulates that principle. So in 2020, when I had my leg amputated as a result of my cancer journey, while I was healing from that amputation, I sat down at the computer every day and I built stories, and they're real stories about real people underneath each of the principles. And that's how sustainable excellence came to be.
Incredible. I really like the flow of the book, the way that it starts off with exploring your purpose. And I've got a quote here. So life is not so much about finding your purpose as it is designing your purpose based on your beliefs. Perhaps you could unpack that a little bit for us, because so many people that I encounter feel like, purpose is so grandiose and it's just almost intangible. I don't know what it is, but I love this idea of designing it based around your beliefs. Maybe you could share a little bit more.
Yeah, I think a lot of times where we sort of get in trouble is we think of purpose in the singular, like it's one thing. There's supposed to be one thing that I'm supposed to do with my life. And I can't speak to everybody, but from my life, I think I've had purposes, plural. When I was young, I felt I was supposed to be an athlete, and I did. I ate, drank, and slept basketball. I loved it. And then as I got into adulthood, I wanted to follow in my grandfather's footsteps and go into law enforcement. And I did that. And now, in all honesty, as I'm probably coming towards the end of my life, I think my purpose has shifted again to putting as much goodness, positivity, motivation, love back into the world as I possibly can. So I don't think there's necessarily one purpose. There may be one purpose at a particular time in your life. And I guess the other thing I would say is, I think you're right. I mean, we tend to hear, what's my purpose? That's such a large, such a grandiose, such a big thing to kind of wrap your head around. And I don't know if that's something we should be thinking about in that regard. It's almost like purpose is this perfect thing. And when I find this thing, everything will be perfect. There's no perfect in life. There's no perfect relationship. There's no perfect human being. There's no perfect job. I love being a police officer. I hated standing on a traffic post for 12 hours wearing all the gear and equipment, but I still love being a cop. So there are just certain things in life that you have to put up with, even if you find your purpose in life. And I'll give you one story that I think illustrates this. There's a man here by the name of Jesse Itzler, and he was a part owner of one of the National Basketball Association franchises here in the United States. And he's married to a woman by the name of Sarah Blakely. And Sarah Blakely is the founder of a woman's undergarment company called Spanx. And her husband tells the story that when she started Spanx, and it's a multi-million-dollar company now, she had one prototype and $5,000. And she had been a facsimile, a fax, door-to-door fax salesman. And she has this great idea. And he said, if she would have waited until everything was perfect, until everything was aligned, he said, I guarantee somebody else would have figured out the idea and gone with it and run with it. He said, you've got to just jump in wherever you are. There's nothing that's going to be perfect. You can't wait for something. Just start now. Start where you are and jump in and figure it out as you go along. Because in life, it's not the destination. It's the journey to that destination that you look back and say, man, that was a heck of a journey.
Great example as well. Just get started. Just do something. Don't try and be perfect, because it doesn't exist.
No.
You talk about 4 truths, and I was wondering if you could expand upon the concept of control your mind, or it will control you.
Yeah. So these 4 truths I came up with, and I'll be honest with you, I was on a podcast, and the title of it was The 3 Truths. So I had to come up with my 3 truths to be on this podcast. And it really forced me or focused me into thinking about what really is important in my life. What really is the bedrock, the foundation of my life, something that's immovable, that no matter what happens to me, that's not going to change. And so I had these 3 truths, and I've added the 4th one. I know we like things in threes, but I just felt the 4th one was important. And I used to get asked, of these four truths, is one more important than the other? And my answer initially was no. I think they're all equally important. But as I've learned, as I've grown, as I've read, I think the truth you just asked me, control your mind or it will control you, is the most important. That you have to be able to control the thoughts in your mind, because if you can't, we all become what we think. So if you over and over and over and over again think negative, think something bad, eventually you'll hardwire your brain to a point where, yeah, you're not any good at that. And there's no way you're going to be good at it. I remember when I was in college, I went to a military college here in the United States. And one year we had a president by the name of James Stockdale. And he had been a Medal of Honor winner here in the United States, which is the highest military award that you can win. And he had spent 8 years as a prisoner of war in the infamous prisoner of war camp known as the Hanoi Hilton during the Vietnam War. And I didn't spend a lot of time around him. He was the president of the school. I was a cadet. But I remember being at a gathering one time and somebody asked him, who survived that ugliness, that brutality, that torture of that prisoner of war camp? He said, well, let me tell you who didn't survive. He said, the people who didn't survive were the big, strong, tough guys that thought they could handle any kind of abuse or torture. The other group, and this kind of surprised me that he said didn't survive, were the optimists. He said these were the people who thought they would be rescued or let go by Thanksgiving or Christmas or Easter, and Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter would come and go, and they weren't rescued. And he said those people died of a broken heart. He said the people that survived were the people that understood what they could control, which according to him was basically the thoughts in their minds and the breathing in their lungs. Everything else was at the discretion of the enemy, and controlled it. And Brad, that's where I think we get sort of off the rails. We try to control all these things that are outside of our purview, that we have no control over. And that's one thing I recommend to people. If something's bothering you, I always tell people, take a piece of paper and write down everything that's bothering you, and then cross out everything that you have no control over, and then work on the things that are left. Work on the things that you have control over. So controlling your mind or it will control you, I think, is absolutely the most important of the four truths.
That story about the Hanoi Hilton, I don't know, it gives me shivers to think that those who just focused on what they could control, and it's the simplest things, my thoughts and my breathing, everything else is taken away. Yeah. And that's basically meditation. That's what people do when they learn meditation, is just basically tune into that.
Exactly. I mean, like he said, it was, when we ate, the enemy decided that. When we were tortured, the enemy decided that. When we slept, the enemy decided. All these things, and people got so, will I get any sleep tonight? Are they going to beat me today? It's like, you have no control over that. So concentrate on the things you can control and control them.
What a case for adopting that optimistic mindset.
Absolutely.
I'm interested in the second of the truths. Embrace the pain and difficulty we all experience in life and use that pain to make you a stronger and more resilient person. Can you expand?
Yeah. So, it kind of goes hand in hand with the first truth about controlling your mind. So our brains are hardwired to avoid pain and discomfort and to seek pleasure. So to the brain, the status quo, the way things are right now, hey, it's comfortable, it's familiar, and just leave it alone. And I'm not going to tell you anything you probably haven't already heard before, but the only way we're going to grow, the only way we're going to get better, the only way we're going to improve is to step outside those comfort zones and do things that make us uncomfortable. When I was coaching high school basketball, if you ever interviewed any of my players, they would always tell you, one of the things I always used to say to them is you need to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. And so people ask, well, how do you do that? How do you control your mind? How do you embrace pain? Because we don't like that. It's like, no, I don't like pain. I want to get away from it. And what I recommend, and I do this every day of my life, do one thing that scares you, that makes you uncomfortable, that makes you nervous, that is potentially embarrassing. It doesn't have to be a big thing. But if you do those small things every day, when the big disasters in life hit us, and they hit all of us, we get, let go from our job, somebody we know ends up passing away, we find out we have a chronic or a terminal illness, you'll be so much more resilient to handle that pain than people who don't do that. And I'm gonna really date myself now. But back in 1976, it was the United States' bicentennial celebration. It was also the year of my 16th birthday, but that's not important. There was a U.S. gold medal winning Olympic swimmer by the name of Shirley Babashoff, who had one of the simplest yet greatest quotes that I ever heard. And this is what she said: winners think about what they want to happen. Losers think about what they don't want to happen. So winners can override their negative brains and focus on what they want to occur. Losers focus on the negative aspects of competition and can't see the value of pursuing a goal or a dream.
How interesting. What a great quote. It's kind of like turning that anxiety into excitement in a way. This is, focus on the possibilities rather than what could go wrong.
Exactly. And we had a writer here, and I'm going to give you another quote. His name was Ernest Hemingway, and he wrote this in the book called Farewell to Arms. He said, life breaks everyone, and afterward, many are stronger at the broken places. And I love that quote. It's just like, if you break your arm, when it heals at that area where it was broken, a lot of times it's stronger because all those, minerals and things go in there and strengthen that bone. Same thing is true of life. If you can survive some of this ugliness, same way, as we talked about Admiral Stockdale, in the prisoner of war camp, if you can survive that, it just strengthens you as a human being.
I really like that. Have you heard of the art of kintsugi?
I have not.
It's something originating in Japan, and when a vase or a piece of an ornament breaks, they repair it using gold. And this actually makes it not only stronger, but more beautiful as a result of enduring some adversity. Love it.
Oh, that's neat. I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. What you leave behind is what you weave in the hearts of others. Very beautifully written. Can you expand?
Yeah. So there's a guy here, or there was a guy here, was a man, his name was Fred Rogers, and he had a television show when I was growing up called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And it was a show, he's gotten a lot of press lately. There was a movie made about his life. Tom Hanks starred as Mr. Rogers and things like that. He educated so many young children, including me, growing up, about values, about how our feelings mattered and are important, about how we treat other people and things like that. And when he died in 2003, his family was going through his effects, and they found his wallet. And inside his wallet was a scrap piece of paper on which Mr. Rogers had written 4 simple words: life is for service. And I absolutely love that. I mean, I think so many people, Brad, feel that they're born empty, and that when they get out of school and get into life, whatever that looks like for them, that then their job is to fill up their empty self. I've got to get the greatest job, and I've got to make the most money and drive the nicest car and live in the best house and have all the latest gadgets and gizmos. And what I found is it's just the opposite. We're not born empty. We're all born full with whatever we need to be successful, however you define that word, already inside of us. We just need to find it, pull it out, and use it to our benefit. So our life should not be about what I get. It should be about what I give. Our life should be about emptying ourselves out with our unique gifts and talents, certainly for the betterment of ourselves, of our family, but also for the betterment of our friends, of our community, of our country. And when you flip that kind of on its head, when you think that it's not about what I get, because there's always going to be one more thing. There's always going to be that, oh, if I get the latest iPhone or the latest, iPad or whatever it is, that's going to make me happy and fulfilled. It's not. There's never going to be enough stuff to make you fulfilled. What makes you fulfilled is, like Mr. Rogers said, being of service in your life, living that life. When I had my leg amputated and I found out I had these tumors in my lungs, I actually went with my wife to the mortuary and the cemetery and the church, and I planned my funeral. And because I give these talks and I'm on podcasts like yours talking about motivation, I actually got some brushback from people who suggested that planning my funeral was in some way defeatist. And I had to remind these folks that the last time I checked, we're all going to die. As far as I know, nobody's working on a cure for life right now. Every one of us is going to die, but not every one of us is truly going to live. And I remember I heard a Native American Blackfoot proverb years ago that I absolutely love. And it goes like this: when you were born, you cried and the world rejoiced. Live your life in such a way so that when you die, the world cries and you rejoice. That's what I want. That's what I'm looking for.
I love that. I love that idea of starting full rather than having to fill that void that so many people feel, and that hedonic treadmill of I need this and I need that. And when I get to that point, I will start becoming a philanthropist, or I'll help others. No, the key to filling the void is to actually just start being of service. It's so simple.
It is. Yeah. I mean, we make life a whole lot more complicated than it needs to be.
And maybe even reframing what you're already doing. So a lot of people don't realize that they're already being of service to others. I mean, most people who are in a job are helping other people in some ways, we would hope. And even that, if you just look at it from a slightly different angle, you can say, actually, I am serving others, and find some fulfillment in that, even if it's not quite the perfect fit right now. Any tips for someone who wants to be of service but doesn't know where to start?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we were talking about before. Start where you're at. Just, find something that you enjoy doing. And I'll give you a story. So I am still being treated for tumors that I have in my lungs. And I met this nurse. She was already a nurse. She was about 25 years old, relatively young. And she was in training on the unit that gives me my infusion therapy. And about 6 months later, she was taking care of me by herself. And she came in and she said, you know what, Terry, I got a story I want to tell you, but I'm a little uncomfortable telling it to you. And I was like, I didn't know how to respond to that. It's like, well, I'm sure I would enjoy hearing it. I hope you decide you want to tell me. So for the next couple hours, she's in and out, and finally comes in, sits down, says, all right, here's the story. He said, when I first met you, I was going to get out of nursing. I had a very good friend of mine die. I was in a very dark place. I talked to my family. I was going to quit nursing, and I was going to go to work for Amazon. And she said, and then I met you. And I see what you go through with your therapy and how you react. I have a terrible reaction to the medication I'm given. And she said, and then I went back in the file and I read everything you've been through in your cancer journey. And she said, after I finished reading your story, I knew I was where I was supposed to be. Now, if she would have never told me that story, I would have had no idea that just my life had had a positive impact on her. So I would tell your audience, you have no idea who's out there, who's watching you go through your struggles, who's seeing how brave you are through those struggles, and probably would give almost everything they have just to walk 5 minutes in your shoes. And you're looking at what's going on with you as this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. So understand there are people out there that just by you living your life, you give some type of, and I'm trying to think of the word I want to use, you give clarity, you give purpose to them just on how you live your life.
Such a powerful message. I'm sure people are thinking about this already. Who is in my life? Who's looking at me? My kids, for example. Your kids look at you as a hero. So be that hero, embrace it because they need it.
Yeah.
So important. The fourth truth, as long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. Tell us about not quitting.
Yeah, I think this is pretty self-explanatory, but the way this kind of resonates with me is that someday my pain is going to end. It may end through surgery. It may end through some type of new medication being developed. Quite frankly, it may end when I die. But if I quit, if I give up, if I give into pain, then pain will always be a part of my life. I like to tell this story. This happened back in the 1950s, which, believe it or not, was even before I was born. And so this happened at Johns Hopkins University here in the United States. There was a professor who did an experiment with rats, and he wanted to see how long rats could tread water. So he put individual rats in a tank of water, and the average rat treaded water for about 15 minutes. And just as those rats were getting ready to sink and drown, he reached in, grabbed them, pulled them out, dried them off, and let them rest for a while. And then he took the exact same rats and put them back in that exact same tank of water. And the second time around, on average, those rats treaded water for 60 hours. Now think about that. The first time, 15 minutes. It's not like your business is going to fail or you're going to fail a test. Your life is going to be over. And the second time around, 60 hours, which said to me two things. Number one, the importance of hope in our lives, that if we believe we're doing the right thing, maybe not today, maybe not this month, maybe not even this year, but more than likely, there's a very good chance that somewhere down the road, we will get what we want or get to what we want. And the second thing it's taught me is just how much more our physical bodies can handle than we ever thought they could. This goes back to the first truth we just talked about. If you can't control your mind, your brain is going to start telling you, this is uncomfortable. I don't like this. Stop it. And you're going to listen to it. But if you can callous your mind, if you can strengthen that brain, you'll be able to push through those difficult times. Now, don't get me wrong. I think we all have a breaking point, but I think that breaking point is so much further down the road than we ever give ourselves credit for.
There's a book called The Expectation Effect by an author called David Robson, and it's so interesting. He looks at how our expectations or beliefs shape our actions and even these untapped reserves that we all have. There was a story of some cyclists in the Tour de France, and one of them was he was really struggling, and so they gave him a placebo. So that his coach said, "This is the best performance enhancing drug, and it's undetectable. Can I give it to you?" Cyclists, okay, let's go. Gave it to him. It was just salt water, and he performed his personal best and won the leg.
Wow.
We have vast untapped potential.
We do.
Exactly as those rats did when they had the hope and belief that, someone's coming. Incredible, exactly. Incredible. Let's shift gears. I'm really interested in your career, which has been so full of different experiences. What have you learned about people as a SWAT team hostage negotiator?
Yeah, I mean, I've learned that we all have that breaking point. And that's, if you think about what we did as negotiators, we were, if you're talking to me and your house is surrounded by the police, yeah, more than likely you're having the worst day, you've had in your life. But I'll give you some of the things that we used to do to kind of help, because there were sometimes literally we would arrive on scene. We had no idea why we were there or what led this person to barricade themselves with a gun or take hostages. And I remember when I first started as a negotiator, we were given a formula. And this formula was how we communicate with each other, not just hostage negotiators, but human beings, how we communicate. And the formula was 7-38-55. So 7% of how we communicate a message with each other is the words that we use. And think how many times you said something, you're like, oh, did I say the right thing? Or maybe I should have said this instead. That's only 7% of how you communicate a message. 38% of how you communicate a message is the tone of voice that you use with that message. And then 55% of how you communicate a message is your body language and your facial expressions. So understanding that, think about us as hostage negotiators, if you're barricaded in a house with a gun, I'm not in that house with you. I'm potentially blocks away talking to you on the phone. So I don't have the luxury of that 55% of saying something to you and you being like, kind of rolling your eyes like, oh, what an idiot. I can't believe he said that. So we had to figure things out, certainly based on what people were saying, but also what they weren't saying and how they were saying that. And one of the things we used to do was we used what was called tactical empathy. I think you can get rid of the word tactical and just say empathy. In other words, okay, if you and I are talking, Brad, help me to understand where you're coming from. Not agree with it. If I'm negotiating with somebody who just murdered 3 people, I'm not going to say, oh, yeah, I totally understand. What? No, but help me to understand where you're coming from. Because understanding builds trust, and trust is where you get to the point where you can change behavior. And the last thing I'll say about this is that we used how and what questions. We stayed away from why questions because why sounds accusatory. Well, Brad, why did you do that? Ooh, wait a minute. Is he saying I shouldn't have done that? Is there I can get to the same information by saying, well, Brad, what got us to this point? That's a much softer question that doesn't sound like I'm accusing you of doing something you probably shouldn't have done.
Useful tips for engaging with your kids, perhaps, or with colleagues at work as a leader?
Yeah, I think so. The thing about it was, I know all this stuff. I've got all this training, all this background, all this experience. And then I get home and our daughter takes a glass of milk and flips it upside down and drops it on the floor. Now all of a sudden all that goes out the window and I'm reacting as a dad, why did you do that? It's like, no, that's not the right way to handle this. But when you put the emotion into it, that's where you get kind of in trouble. And I'll describe it this way. As negotiators, think about a teeter-totter or a seesaw that we used to play on at the park. And when we started negotiating with somebody, their emotional brain was way up in the air and their rational brain was down on the ground. And by asking these open-ended questions and how and what questions, we would get them to burn off a lot of that emotional energy so that teeter-totter would kind of get to equilibrium. And then more talking, more discussion, more questions. Hopefully we got to the point where their rational brain was up in the air and their emotional brain was down on the ground. And that's the time we would start talking about solutions, putting the gun down, letting the hostages go, coming out. Because we all know we make better decisions for ourselves using our rational brain as opposed to our emotional brain.
Makes a lot of sense. So it's about the ability to calm yourself and restore and reactivate the rational brain in these situations.
Well, we're emotional people. I mean, humans are emotional, and there's a reason for that. But you just make better decisions for yourself when you use that rational brain as opposed to that emotional brain.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. And sometimes at the end of a long day when you're at home and you're tired and hungry or whatever it is, it's easier to activate that reptilian brain response. And that's okay too. It's part of life.
Yes.
Exactly. So you are a cancer warrior, and many people are. It's certainly on the increase around the world. What have you learned about yourself over the course of this journey, and any tips you can share with others?
Yeah, I was just talking to one of my nurses. I had treatment last week, and I remember saying to her, I have lived more in the 12 years that I've been dying of cancer than I've lived probably in my entire life. And I've had a great life before cancer. I've done a lot of neat things, fun things, exciting things, but I really feel, I was a college athlete. I was on the SWAT team. I was a physical person. And then I get cancer and I have my foot amputated in 2018. I have my leg amputated in 2020. I have tumors in my lungs. So, I get the question, how do you balance those things? Being an athletic, physical person and now being confined to a wheelchair. And my response has been, when you can't do what you're good at, you do what's important. And I think that's where I am in my life. It's not, being a hostage negotiator, being a police officer. Yes, I think I made a difference. Being a basketball player, did I make a difference? It was a lot of fun, but did I make a difference? Now I really think I'm making a difference. And I don't want your audience to think that, I don't have bad days. I do. I mean, you're looking at me right now. There's no S on my chest. I do not have a cape and fly around with magical powers. I have bad days. I get down. I cry. I feel sorry for myself. All those things that we feel emotionally when we're hurting, when we're tired, when we're depressed, I get those. I have them. But I also understand that it's my choice. It's not my fault, but it's my responsibility to deal with that. It's my responsibility as to how I react to that. Why I got cancer? No idea. I've had all 88 genes tested the doctors know of or suspect cause every form of cancer that we know of, and I have no mutations in any of my genes. Yet I have this very rare, deadly form of cancer. Why? Not a question I really ask. I don't ask why. I just ask what I can do to focus on the living. And I'll give you one final story on this. So after I had my leg amputated, about 6 months later, my doctor showed me my CAT scan. And I have no medical background. I don't know how to read a CAT scan. But you can kind of look at it and be like, well, that sure doesn't look like it belongs there. I had these big tumors in my lungs and fluid all around the pleural spaces. And I remember looking at my oncologist and saying, how was I alive? And Brad, I'll never forget this. Put his head down, shook his head no. And then he looked up at me and he said, I don't know because you shouldn't have been. Which said to me that God's not done with me yet. When I die, where I die, how I die, way above my pay grade. Don't spend nearly as much time worrying about the dying. Spend a whole lot more time interested in the living part of my life right now.
Mm. And when you reflect back over your journey, what are some moments or events that have really brought you fulfillment?
I think that certainly that story I told you about the nurse, about the impact that I had on that nurse, having no idea that I did. She has since moved to another state here in the United States, and I'm still in touch with her. We still talk. She's roughly my daughter's age. So it's just fun to make those connections. And I'll say this. One of the nurses who cares for me used to be a hospice nurse. And for those of your audience who don't know about hospice, it's people who care about others, take care of others at the end of life care. And she's in the infusion center now. And she gave me a book to read. And the book was called Imagine Heaven. And it's a book about people who have near-death experiences. And a lot of interesting things in the book. For example, if people are born totally blind or totally deaf and have a near-death experience, they can see and they can hear, which I think is hilarious. But then when they come back, they're still blind and they're still deaf. The other thing, and this I think is so incredibly important, is no matter who you see or who you encounter when you die, whether it's, God or Jesus or Allah or a saint or an angel or a friend or a family member, the one question that everybody seems to get asked is, how do you treat my people? And if you think back in the Bible, and I'm sure other religions have the same kind of thing, what's the most important commandment? Love your God above all other gods. And the second is just like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And I think that's that second part of that commandment. How do you treat my people? How do you treat each other? How do you connect with each other? And if, I've been asked the question, how do you want to be remembered? I don't want to be remembered. I'm not going to be remembered. I'm not famous. I'm not important. Nobody's going to build a statue to me. But what I want is connection with other people. I want to have those relationships, those meaningful relationships with other people. And that to me would, if I did nothing else in my life, if I had meaningful connections, to me, that would be a fulfilled life.
And you definitely are having that impact. I mean, even just looking at the reviews on your book on Amazon, and there'll be a link in the show notes for everyone. So please do go and check it out. you're having such a positive effect on people's lives through the work that you're doing, and of course through the many podcasts that you've been on, sharing your message. Who inspires you?
I really have to go back to my parents. My brothers and I were all athletes. We all played, college sports and things like that. My parents taught us the value of family, of loving each other, of caring for each other, of supporting each other. My mom and dad were, they used to do divide and conquer parenting. My middle brother, I'm the oldest, and my middle brother, we're 13 months apart. So, we were pretty much in the same leagues when we were playing sports. But, on a Tuesday night at 5:00, I had a practice, and a Tuesday night at 5:00, my brother has a game. So dad's going with me, mom's going with my brother. It was all about family. And now it really is. I get sanctuary. I get the feeling that I belong, that things are okay. And I did this. This has been my whole life. This was when I was a police officer. This was when I was on SWAT. Come on, we're going out after the shift and we're going to have a drink. No, because what grounds me is my family. My wife, my daughter, my faith, my friends. Those are the things that ground me. Those are the things that are absolutes, that are foundational, that aren't going to change, that aren't going to move for me. So those are the people that I look to when I feel down, when I hurt, when, I'm depressed and things like that. Those are the people, those are the things that I go to make myself better.
Such a pleasure talking to you. How can people connect with you, find out more, potentially have you on their podcasts? What would you like them to do?
So I have a blog. It's called Motivational Check. Every day I put up a thought for the day. And with that thought usually comes a question about how maybe you can apply that thought into your life. I have recommendations for books to read. You can leave me a message, get access to my social media links. That's all at motivationalcheck.com. Excellent.
And any final thoughts for people out there that you can share?
Yeah, let me tell you one more story. I had a nurse about a year ago asked me what it was like to have my foot amputated and then to have my leg amputated. And I told her it certainly hasn't been easy. When you're 6'8", learning to walk again, falling is not an option. You kind of get hurt from this height. So, I told her it hasn't been easy. But what I told her was cancer can take all my physical faculties, but cancer can't touch my mind. It can't touch my heart, and it can't touch my soul. And that's who I am. That's who you are, Brad. That's who everybody who's listening to us really is. And we spend a tremendous amount of time working on this body. We go to the gym, we eat right, we get enough rest, we reduce stress. And I'm certainly not telling you not to do that. I think you absolutely should. But what I am suggesting is maybe every day, spend a little more time on who you really are, your heart, your mind, and your soul. We know someday this body is going to die. It's going to decay. It's going to go away. But your heart, your mind, and your soul, those things are eternal. Those things live on. And I just don't think we spend nearly as much time working on them as we probably should.
Terry Tucker, thank you so much. You've given me chills a few times today, telling me some of the stories in a good way. Really wonderful conversation. And everyone who's tuned in, please do check out the links, motivationalcheck.com, and check out Terry's book. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you, Terry. I look forward to seeing everyone in the next episode. See you soon.